Hi everyone, welcome back with another talk with Peter Ingle and myself, Mihai Algiu. Last time previous episode, I believe number 31st, we started to tackle this idea of cosmology, the bigger picture from the point of view of fourth way primarily, as well as some of the non-duality ancient teachings. As cosmology being very important, the study of the bigger picture being very important and equally important to the study of the psychology and of the sense of separation, the ignorance, all the other important tenets that we have talked for the last 30 episodes. So now we went into the bigger picture. So I would just like to go straight into it and continue from last time. And I want to ask you, Peter, how shall we go from here to tackle this more elusive yet essential problem of, or issue of the cosmology, was very much to do with God, right? Or how God organized the creation, and we are a small part of it.
I think that's the keynote, that we're a small part of it. That we are a small part of an enormous whole, a much bigger whole. And this idea from the fourth way that the ray of creation, that we as human beings on the surface of the earth, in a solar system, in a galaxy, in the universe, that we are connected, like everything's connected. In other words, that's one of the principal ideas of this cosmology. Everything's connected. Yes, stemming from the creator, whatever that is. We don't understand, and our minds aren't capable of understanding that whole concept. It's simplified very much by science in the form of the Big Bang, but that is far from answering a multitude of questions about reality, about creation, about existence, and all that. Far from it. And this idea that we are a tiny cog, and it's, for example, I was thinking since our last talk, when we started this conversation, that we take it so much for granted that we are human beings, that we're in this human form. This is just another form in all of creation. We know many other forms on the surface of the earth, on planet Earth, the mineral world, the animal world, the vegetable world, the clouds, the oceans. We have an idea of the planet. We can't even with our naked eye really see another planet. But with the aid of telescopes and other equipment and cameras that have actually flown by these planets, amazing, we're able to see them. But they're just other forms, and this human being is just another form. And it's so automatic for us to be human, to have limbs, to have a head, to be able to talk like this and communicate fairly intelligently about ideas. This is an unusual thing. And the fourth way presents the idea that in the cosmology, all of these influences are passing throughout this universe, up and down this chain, from higher worlds to lower worlds. Influences are coming down, influences are passing back up. And a key component in our solar system is the Earth. It's the only planet that we know of in our solar system that has this thin strip of life around on the surface of it, just on the very thin surface. We forget even that we're on this enormous rock that may have some kind of thermal center and is a device of a form all of its own, which is mysterious and unknown to us in so many ways. Then here we are as part of this thin strip of organic life. And this is not an accident. That's what the cosmology is saying. This is all by design, so that these influences can come from the galaxy to the sun, throughout its solar system and planets, and reach the Earth and the moon. And that this so-called device of organic life on Earth is intended to be there for the purpose of enabling certain fine transmissions to pass through the solar system from the sun and planets to the moon. And that this is part and parcel of the whole galaxy. And that human beings within this organic life on Earth are the most sophisticated mechanism or sophisticated device within the larger mechanism of organic life on Earth. And this, we take it so for granted that we have movement, sensation, thought, and emotion. What the fourth way says is these are all sort of channels for receiving influences coming from the sun and from the planets, for example. These influences affect us. They manifest in us as human beings in the form of thoughts, emotions, sensations, movements. Then people are busy about their lives and don't understand that in doing so, in just being busy being a human, we are playing our part as a tiny cog in this big mechanism. And the same goes for when we talk about trying to wake up or become enlightened or be present or be more aware, realize awareness, and all these things. This is also not an accident. This also has some kind of purpose. It's related to it's much more than about just you or me trying to reach bliss or experience a state of love all the time. There's much more than that. It's much bigger than that. That can be wonderful, but what's that got to do with the rest of it, with the big picture, as we're calling this, the bigger picture? And that's why I feel it is helpful for us to revisit this subject, flesh it out as much as we can. People can go to the Gurdjieff and Ouspensky's books and read about these concepts and understand from that what they will. But I think it's very useful for us to blow some fresh air into these sails around this idea of cosmology. It's powerful. And as I said last time, it can be so refreshing to get out of our little life and our little psychology and even our little, what can sometimes be a selfish or singular effort to wake up and see it's part of something much bigger. What might that be? For example, what happens if you do wake up? What comes after? Now, some people would say, well, nothing. It's always is. That's what is. Nothing ever happens. Nothing will happen. I would take a different position and suggest there are other many higher dimensions than this dimension. And this idea of consciousness ascending through this ray of creation, not just descending. It's one of the few ascending octaves, as the fourth way says, in the ray of creation. And this has a lot of depth to it and is worth considering. And these tools of the cosmology, a lot of them, as I believe Ouspensky pointed out, they give the mind a handle sort of by which it can try to understand how consciousness perceives reality. And then these ideas are like tools that help the mind relate to these higher understandings as much as it can, the human intellect. But ultimately, what we're talking about when it comes to cosmology is really it's a language that only awareness, consciousness itself knows, doesn't speak, but knows. And then, but somehow we can, with the help of these ideas mentally, we can climb up to the edge of the next higher dimension, up where awareness realizes itself. It's useful that our mind can play a part in this. Often the mind is dismissed, the human intellect. It's dismissed. We don't need it. And I've said that myself. We don't need thought, which is true on one level. At the same time, it's part of the design of this human being to be able to be given this knowledge and use this knowledge as a trampoline almost for awareness to jump out of the room. And it can be quite powerful.
Well, what sparks in me is I started actually reading this book that I never read before from Ouspensky called the New Model of the Universe.
Mm.
I guess I didn't read it before because I thought or assumed that he wrote that before he met Gurdjieff and the system, and I thought there might be some kind of just intellectual pursuit, but I have a sense that he worked on that book for many decades and perfected it. So he's dealing with the bigger picture there. He's not going into the psychology, but the cosmology, the esoteric history of humanity, the role of humanity. So I highly recommend.
And my understanding, by the way, is he had started that book before he met Gurdjieff and was introduced to the language of the fourth way. And he purposely did not bring the fourth way language and ideas into his continuing of the writing of that book, which, as you say, as I've understand, he worked on for many more years. He was only with Gurdjieff about a year and a half, remember, initially. They stayed in contact for a number of years after that, many years after that. But this book was that you're talking about, it's in his own language and in the philosophical and scientific language of the day in which he was writing.
So I was listening to it because it's on Audible, and I could sense that although the science of his time 100 years ago was like very different than our science now, but he was alluding to the bigger picture. He was alluding to, he was questioning, challenging, and seeing the materialistic paradigm, and even this sense of imagined separation is totally imagined. But what came to me now as I was hearing you was this idea that basically at the level of humanity, there is the outer circle of humanity and the inner circle of humanity. This is from the point of view of their level of being, their level of wakefulness. And he was saying this thing that the masses are more like a descending force. It kind of goes, it's kind of run by mechanical forces and goes into a mechanical unconscious directions as the masses. And then only some individual men, only through individual effort, then one can rise above the pressure of the mechanical unconscious laws and sufferings of the masses and the illusory pursuits. Through conscious intentional labor, conscious suffering, through the help of a school or of a master. So only individual man rises above it. And then these individual men are individual more evolved men from the point of view of consciousness. They are interconnected, whether they know it or not. And they form a nucleus of, from one angle, the most conscious, the most evolved aspect of humanity, the conscious circle of humanity. And then he was saying that the interaction between the gains of this conscious small part of humanity, the gains of this small inner circle that is thrown into the masses, it becomes distorted, it becomes diluted, it becomes misunderstood, but something remains, and that is what we call progress of the civilization. So what we call progress of civilization is what remains in society from the influence of higher conscious men. So my point here is that it seems like to be in the design of the human being, and that's what Ouspensky was talking there in the fourth way. It's a common idea that only the human being machine, the human being with it having the most sophisticated nervous system and having an additional function besides the moving center, instinctive center, emotional center, sex center, there is the intellectual center. with the ability of abstract thought. Somehow having an extra function, this allows us the possibility of so the human being is like a self-evolving, has the possibility of self-evolving, whereas the other creatures, they don't have that. And somehow it is a design of the architect that there is this possibility in humans. So it is a design of the architect that large part of the humanity is unconscious and living in some mass illusion, mass hypnosis, mass hysteria. It's not a mistake. It's not bad. Somehow it is needed in this way. And also it is designed by the architect that some people can rise above it. They are lifting themselves from certain influences.
Their consciousness is.
Right.
Yes. I think that's important to be clear about.
So maybe we can touch on that, on this idea that the different depends on the level of consciousness we are at. We are under different operating influences, and that's unavoidable. We are influenced, completely influenced by various things. Even an enlightened master is influenced by certain things. It's just that the type of influence is different. And it seems like the process of evolution, we are changing the influences we put ourselves under.
I guess another way to say it is that, and this again, the fourth way presents this in this idea of the cosmology in the form of the ray of creation, that let's call it the universe as we know it, has a physical aspect to it. Let's like a physical body. And it has a conscious aspect to it, consciousness. And this is, we as human beings parallel this. We have a physical, we have a physiology. And even our psychology is tied to our physiology in many ways. But we also have this consciousness aspect. And it's as though we, and this is what makes the human being rare, unique, is that the human being is like a container of a certain kind in which awareness can realize itself, in which and through which the container isn't conscious. The container doesn't become more conscious. Consciousness becomes more self-aware. Consciousness becomes more aware as being itself, as being, as the being, this beingness of consciousness or awareness. And that the universe in general is serving what the fourth way calls serving mechanical purposes. This has to do largely with the physical side of the universe. And then there's this conscious purpose that also serves, and it needs to serve both. That some consciousness has to realize itself and rise up through this thing called the ray of creation. And for example, you mentioned suffering a moment ago. Again, this is the fourth way is so simple and frank and cuts right through this idea of suffering, that suffering is part of life on earth. All forms of living matter, of form, living forms of creation, all of them suffer. And of course, ultimately, all of them die, what's called dying, which means the disintegration of their physical form. But in their physical form, they all suffer, and this is part of it. And this, according to the cosmology of the fourth way, is because the earth is in such a unique place, or it's in such a place within this ray of creation, it's considered that it's the equivalent of the stomach of the solar system. And what's being digested and then being fed, or it's being matter, influences coming from above, are being digested and then passed on to the moon, is the idea. It sounds kind of crude and crazy. So I mean, when you first hear this idea, maybe. To me, when I heard it, it wasn't crazy at all. It was sort of, ooh, look at that. That's interesting. There's this huge mechanism at work. And the idea is that suffering is meant to happen to everyone on Earth. And the idea is not that we cannot escape suffering as a human being, but consciousness need not be attached to and identified with the suffering when it happens. And through this process, consciousness itself can be transformed as though extracted out of a lower dimensions and realize itself. Whereas most of the time, consciousness is being sucked down into all that we experience as a human being. And it attaches to and identifies as a feeling of I, as a feeling of my body, my emotions, my thoughts, my life, my problems, my suffering. And by virtue of that, we serve in mass this functioning of this ray of creation in such a way as for the higher to feed the lower, for the higher to descend from rarefied form into more dense form, into faster form, into much slower form, and into from formlessness into form. And it's almost like an exhalation. You can think of it as an exhalation. And then theoretically, and this is where I think this idea in the East comes from of breathing in and breathing out. The universe is breathing in and breathing out. And in a sense, it's breathing consciousness out and breathing consciousness back in. And these are big ideas. These are big truths that we normally don't think about. We just think, I have my life. I can do what I want. I can make this happen if I want. I can make that happen. I don't need to suffer. I can just be happy. None of that's true. We are these little cogs and things happen. The moon gets full and we start to have more bizarre thoughts. The solar flares erupt from the sun and they send plasma flying through space. And it takes, I think the plasma takes a couple of days to reach the Earth and affect the magnetic field of the Earth in dramatic ways. And we're these little tiny little things inside. We're like little pieces of the receiving mechanism, and we are very much affected by this in our thoughts and emotions and our physical. Sometimes you might feel a little tension or a little heat or a little weird, things like that. And then the solar flares themselves only take a few minutes. I think it's 8 minutes, according to science. When there's a flare, a burst of light coming from the sun, what's called a solar flare, and there's that, like the light got turned up, that light coming is carrying more than just light to the Earth. It takes 8 minutes to get here. And then the plasma is when there's physical material from the sun in the form of particles are actually almost spit out, not just at the Earth, but into the solar system. And some of it happens to just reach Earth. And we're close to the sun. Jupiter, Saturn, much farther away. Mercury, Mars, Venus, and Earth, pretty close relative to Jupiter and Saturn, according to the distances. And so we live a life as human beings, what the fourth way calls mechanical and asleep, meaning consciousness is not realizing itself as consciousness, but we have this capacity. The animals don't have this. The trees don't have this. The rocks don't have this. The clouds, the oceans, they don't have this. They are form. They've been created. They're a manifestation of form also, but they don't have this, for lack of a better word, this built-in capacity to be aware of their own existence. And for that awareness of their existence to realize itself as awareness. And somehow we by the grace of God, by the design of the Creator, as you put it earlier, that is what is happening. And that is why human life, from one point of view, is so sacred, so profound, so seemingly rare in the universe. We don't understand what it means that we have found ourselves here in human form. on the surface of the earth with this capacity to be more and more conscious of the fact that we exist as a human being, of the fact that we exist on the surface of a planet, with the fact that we exist in a solar system. And another thing is this idea of the ray of creation, the cosmology, why it can be so powerful is that the idea is there are these layers of worlds, worlds within worlds that make up this ray of creation. And each world is under more laws, which I think is a simple idea enough to understand. When you go from higher, finer, denser, slower matter, there are more and more laws that you're under. It's like being under more weight. And this is true of us personally. We are under more laws, for example, when we are fully invested in negative emotions. We're under a lot of laws, psychological laws and physical laws when that's happening. And we can be free from that law. We're under many laws that we don't even realize, but when you start to observe it, you can feel it. When we're in imagination, this is a psychological law that human beings are under. The planets aren't in imagination. That's not a property of the laws that the planets are influenced by. But human beings on Earth have this. And then what's called identification, where our consciousness is always lapsing into what it is conscious of. We just see something and we immediately, our awareness goes into it. Doesn't retain recognition as itself seeing what is being seen, hearing what is being heard. They collapse into each other and without conscious awareness. And we don't have to be under the laws of negative emotions or imagination or identification. And these are three enormous laws specific to human beings. The earth is under its own laws, the planets are under their own laws, the sun. But each world, as you go higher, theoretically, according to the fourth way cosmology, is under fewer and fewer laws. What does this mean, theoretically at least? It means when we escape from these laws, these lower laws in ourselves, we begin to be under the influence of only the laws that the planets are under, or only the laws that the sun is under. Now, this speaks to our consciousness. That means our consciousness is under fewer and fewer and fewer laws. Our physical body remains a physical body on planet Earth, form of human being, still will suffer, still will feel pain, still will feel effects of the full moon, will still feel the effects of a solar flare. And by the way, we're in the height of solar flare season. It goes in cycles, and I don't know exactly, but I read lately we're at one of the waves of the height of these solar flares, and these masses of plasma being spit at the earth almost, and we're being affected. It's no accident, it seems, that we see war. There's more conflict right now in the world. Political tension has never been at a greater height, it seems. Human animosity, hatred, dislike, separation, isolation, it's all exacerbated right now. And the fourth way would say it's no accident the solar flares are at their height. It's no accident we're seeing more natural catastrophes and things. We're this little thing, Earth, and the surface of the Earth, under these tremendous influences. But we fail to see that. We just see, oh my gosh, it's getting warmer. We better do something about global warming. Then we won't have so many earthquakes and tornadoes and forest fires, which from one level, that's true. But that's not necessarily what's the bigger cause behind all of this. We're the recipient of a lot of big things going on in the solar system and in the galaxy. But we're not conscious of this.
Yeah, I feel like, I was always a practical person, or I wanted to be a practical guy that worked to be practical. So my mind, as I'm hearing this, I'm like, okay, well, how can we make this practical? How can our viewers make this practical? But I can see that if one is at the level of consciousness that one's head is less filled with what would they think of me and trying to be seen, and this law of considering, and they didn't treat me right, and and all the stuff that happened that I'm suffering, and all the stuff that will happen and I'm suffering. Yeah, as the psychology is more settled down and we are more quiet mind or something like that, less tortured energy in the body, then we have the bandwidth to look up, and even contemplating on these thoughts, even talking about, raises basically increases the level of relativity. So we are escaping this little box of human centric universe, and that is a step in the right direction.
And in fact, when you look at the fourth way, the way Gurdjieff and Ouspensky present it, they talk about obstacles to awakening, obstacles to self-remembering. And one way you can see what these obstacles are is what we're talking about. They are laws.
Mm-hmm.
They're each a kind of a law peculiar to human beings that keep consciousness asleep, keep consciousness attached to the body and mind, to the force centers, to the feeling of I. And I would say that all of them, or I would say the basic three are identification, imagination, and negative emotions. The other obstacles are related to those three in some manner. And this is interesting too. I'll just mention the idea is that as you go from higher to lower worlds, each lower world is under not only all the laws of all the worlds above it, dimensions above it, but under three of its own laws. And then the world below it is the result of all the worlds above us, plus our three, plus three of its own. So that means technically the moon in the breakdown of the ray of creation is under three more laws than the earth. But of course, it's more complex than that. But the three laws, the three major laws that we as human beings are under, occupy half the volume of all of the rest of the laws above us, because they're far away, they're smaller. But then right immediate to our existence on earth, there are three laws according to the fourth way that are the principal things keeping consciousness bound. And to the best of my analysis of this, they are what I mentioned: identification, imagination, and negative emotions. And if we free ourselves from these, we can learn, instead of being transformed by our suffering in such a way as to serve the planetary purposes of the ray of creation, we instead can use suffering to transform consciousness, in which case it would ascend. Instead of it descending, we ascend. Suffering becomes a catalyst, and it becomes a main catalyst for human beings. I think it's safe to say there's never been someone who experienced self-realization at great height and great depth who did not suffer some intensely at some point, or at several points, or many points during their life, during their existence. This suffering thing, we don't understand suffering either. And as human beings, we mistake it as something bad, for example. And we think, I did bad, I'm sorry, what's wrong? All these kind of things. No, suffering is Ouspensky called it a kind of fermentation. If the earth, if organic life on earth, all this life forms on the surface of the earth, if they are equivalent to the stomach of the solar system, they are like, this is where the digestion is happening, the digestive juices, and there's a fermentation going on. Things are being turned into other things. And then there's waste product too. This is, again, we get back to this idea, man made in the image of God. We are like a small ray of creation. And the solar system itself is like a ray of creation, bigger than us, but smaller than the big ray of creation. And it is also a body like we are, just bigger. The solar system, interesting to think of it as a body. And it has a length and a width and a breadth, and it's moving in the galaxy, just as we have length and breadth and width, and we're moving in the three-dimensional world of Earth, and we take it so much for granted. It's so automatic, and we fail to see that behind this, as Uspensky said, behind the surface of life, as we see it, as we perceive it, there's something much bigger.
It struck me what you said here about and that this dimension of this earth is like a stomach of the solar system, and it sounds strange. And I hear this in other teachings too, that although it is a maximum opportunity to be embodied here, a spirit with a body here, it's a great opportunity for some reason. Various traditions speak about it. They also say that, hey, this is they call it like a dog-eat-dog world. And Uspensky called it that here on the earth is a pain factory. And I was just watching some nature shows the other day. I started to get into nature shows and stuff like that. But basically everything is eating something else and is being eaten by something else. The salmon and this and the crocodiles and the jaguar and the whole thing. And there is this somehow divine harmony of earth maintaining, but is based on something is eating and is being eaten by something else. So that shows that at the physical form, that is not a place of rest and a place of joy and peace, definitely not lasting.
Yes, I think you said it's not the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah. Although Master Jesus said, they asked him, like, hey, when is the kingdom of heaven going to come? How will we know? In the Gospel of Thomas, is it going to be then or here? What are the signs? And Jesus would say, like, hey, the kingdom of heaven is going to come at some point, or is there or here. It is within our heart. The kingdom of heaven is right here and now. And it seems like this. So there is the possibility, is the kingdom of heaven. Everything is the kingdom of heaven, but in this dimension of the physical and separation, it is like a pain factory within the kingdom of heaven. And also there is this, in some other teachings, and I was also talking to somebody who supposedly is like, let's say, reached a high level of consciousness, like a man number 7 or something like that. And this person was saying, like, hey, it's not that there's no suffering. Like, it is actually to be in this earth. It's a lot of suffering. Even one has cleared the unnecessary suffering and the suffering that is coming from the sense of separation and for going against the law of God, being against, basically there's a lot of suffering through forgetting the law that all is one and thinking that I'm a rogue, self-serving, independent thing. So that is a big suffering. But even the person was saying, even if you clear all of this and you don't have to suffer with the tortures of the mind and of the tortures of the emotions and the illusions, still there is some inescapable suffering, basically this impermanence. Everything that we love is going to die. Everything we're going to lose, everything we love, and including this body and our kids and our parents and the loved ones and the dogs and the pets. There is there cannot be stability and safety at the level of form, and somehow it was called like the wound of love, that due to the impermanence, everything, basically we're going to lose what we love, and there's no resolution at the level of this, the resolution at the higher level. And another type of suffering this person was saying is that being open and conscious to this earth and what's happening and to the people in it that are at a low level is painful. one will feel it. One will feel so there's the pain of being conscious in a world that is unconscious. It is hard. It requires a lot of transmutation. So it's not that, okay, now I do this, meditate, and I reach some level, and I'm, as you said, I'm groovy, and I'm free of suffering, and it's perfect bliss all the time. Doesn't seem to be the case. But just a little bit more, Peter, here. I find a practical thread here, what you said with this freeing ourselves from the dense laws of unconsciousness, and very practical, this, as you call it, the obstacles. The obstacles are density of consciousness, unconsciousness kind of ruling our life. So for men,
well, consciousness being further and further infused into our human psychology and human body.
right. So I have experienced this in people and myself, and you surely experienced it. Let's say to be free or much freer of this. I mean, I see a lot of people I work with, they are suffering a lot with how people see them and how they should please people and how they should be seen as good and how, so this is called inner considering, identification with the imaginary picture and trying to put it in a certain way. And it's, since it's very unstable and imaginary, it's very sensitive and hurtable. So one can spend the whole life of getting credibility or getting respect or not getting it, and it is possible to be done with it. So we don't have to worry about this. I don't worry about, even as a therapist, I'm doing the best I can, but I don't have any thoughts. Oh man, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe what would they think of me? This or that. What would the client think of me? What would this person think of me? And from one angle, I got used to it, but there's much less of this. So I'm freer, we are freer from this law of trying to please, trying to be good, trying to be seen in a certain way, all this inner considering, yeah? Also, the law of imagination. Basically, most people are, there's no quiet space of being. It's all the time the radio in the head. So, and this radio in the head broadcasts the unconscious psychology. Again, inner considering or trying to get safety, security, love in that which cannot provide it to us. And the control, to manage, to avoid future thing, so that also, and it's possible to, if as the mind, as one gets more conscious and one knows, has a sense of who or what one is, it comes with like a diminishing of this imagination, which is diminishing a lot of suffering. And now I'm available for, when one is in imagination, one is not available to the messages of the universe. One is not available to the beauty, to the sunset, to the miracle. So one is unavailable to the kingdom of heaven from one angle, because one is stuck in the box with the radio.
And we can feel these things. The more we attune ourselves to them consciously, we can feel the weight, the psychological weight, for example, of negative emotions. And we can feel, at least in moments, when we are free of that weight and understand we're out from under a very specific law. And the same with imagination, it's no accident. We often call it the cloud of imagination, because it's as though we're in a cloud. It's like the atmosphere around the earth. It's like and in fact, there's a parallel between the human person, their mind and their imagination working according to the number of laws in the ray of creation. It parallels the atmosphere of the surrounding the earth. And it is like it is like a cloud, it's like an atmosphere, this imagination. And we're in it, and it's kind of messy. And then we pop out, and it's like we pop out. We're no longer bound by that cloud. We're now out of the atmosphere of our psychology, and we're into space. And we're into space where all the planets are. I mean, there's a direct parallel there. And then going toward the sun, to the source of consciousness. And these are parallels, and this exists in us, and we can feel it when we're less identified. We can feel it when we're less in imagination. We can feel it when we're less negative. You mentioned inner considering also, this idea of worrying about what other people, how we imagine we are being perceived, and how that churns in us psychologically and just nourishes our feeling of I in an artificial way. And we can feel when we are less under these laws. You can even feel it sometimes when you step out of a certain environment. Like some people have a very difficult job, intense jobs, and they're identified, and they may even be negative. And then they step away from that, and it's not there, and their identification diminishes, their negativity diminishes. They feel lighter. They feel happy. Happiness, by the way, genuine happiness, genuine joy, genuine love, these things that are spoken to, these are the result of being under less laws. And now we're under these higher laws. Because you could say that even the feeling of love and the feeling of joy are still under some kind of law. They're the result of being. And I believe it is the case that it is also possible to rise above those. Consciousness can rise even above those, be under even less laws, and be closer to its origin, its source, its highest potential. How high does this potential exist for us in the ray of creation? We don't know that. I don't know that. And so, but it's, I can say it's much higher than we believe, or much higher than we usually know.
Yeah, talking about this, and we encourage the viewers, especially the ones that are coming to our groups, to really look into this, the worlds and the laws. So it is said that the level of false personality, the level of when consciousness is in the setting of self-forgetfulness, and it is the level of being the ego, it's under 96 laws. 96 laws. It's almost like 96 things that you have to worry about, you have to fulfill, you have to please, all these 96 things. You have to do it. And the level of our essence, like when you see a child that's born and for a few years before they get contaminated with a lot of conditioning, the level of our what's called essence in the fourth way, or authentic nature, that is under 24 laws. That's world 24. So they are like, and that's why we love children, because they are so freer and they have less worries and they are much happier. Therefore, they don't have to please 96 masters and check 96 boxes. So, and this, however, you see, we lose that kind of lightness of being, spontaneity, creativity, and then, due to various factors like wrong education, is educated by people who are asleep. And just how it works here, we are getting denser and denser. And this you can see also at the level of the earth. Say I took a friend of mine to Sardine Lake here in California, where we went and there was a mountain lake, and then we hiked, and there was another mountain lake. There's a high mountain lake with a mountain, and there was no traffic, no people, just the hawks and like that. Yeah, so there was World 24, and it hit me like we are in a town, especially in a large town. We are bombarded with sounds and radio frequency and Wi-Fi and things that you have to do. And even if one is really trying to be as conscious as one's possible, one goes fights against all of this pressure of unconscious, the busyness, the doingness, the I have to do this and check this and that. And I could see, I just stayed in the mountains there for like a few hours, and I would be like, whoa, it's like quiet, and then things are different. And somehow I took some even space from my friend. We took some time aside separately for an hour, just sat on that rock looking at vista, and it's just nothing. I mean, no TV. And we rejoined, and both of us were like, hey, I had this great idea. Like, yes, all right, me too. I have this, I got it. So we, out of the quietness of our being, now we had this creativity, So as you said before, the world, that's why when we go in nature, some people who go in nature, it's like a hacking in a way, just by spending some time in nature. If you don't bring your boombox and you don't, not on the phone, so you're spending time in nature, that will inadvertently bring you to another lighter dimension in oneself. I guess to make it more, somebody asked us, well, okay, so we free ourselves from certain laws, like unnecessarily worrying about what other people think of us, or thinking a lot about what happened, hoping that we did something else and blaming ourselves that we did that, or interpreting a certain past situation as there's not fair and I'm a victim. All of these are laws that bring suffering, and they are self-maintained. So this can be freed, and then still we are under still some laws. Basically, we need air. The temperature needs to be at a certain thing. If the temperature changes more than 4 or 5 degrees or even less, internally the body dies. We need water. We need pretty good water, and we need food. And we are the law that the body ages and will die. And so there are still these things, as Buddha would say, the old age, death, impermanence, old age and death and sickness. This is unavoidable. But all the other unnecessary suffering, self-created, that is optional. And here we come to the topic of suffering, the suffering that, and as they say in the Gurdjieff would say that everybody suffers. Everybody suffers here, but most people suffer without any grain of results. There's no profit. And in the fourth way, or any solid spiritual path, basically what we diminish our unnecessary suffering, and we make profit from the unavoidable suffering.
I was just thinking a good example. It goes back to the fact that the politics are at a high tension in this country right now. They are in many countries right now, in fact, but just thinking about the United States, because that's where we are, there's going to be an even more heightening of tension and animosity and even hatred. And this tension is going to rise up and through this election. And many people will lose it, meaning not lose the election. It means they will lose themselves through identification with what's happening. And an example of, there will be this tension, but instead of giving way to it by identifying with it over much and being in lots of imagination about it, and then having lots of negative emotions where you're disagreeing violently with other people and you're having animosity and vitriol toward candidates and all these things, See, all of that's just falling into this mechanical mechanism of being a human being on earth, as opposed to just seeing what's happening, watching what's happening, and not investing identity into it. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you don't lose yourself consciously. You don't let your identity chew on all this stuff. And this is a practical example for many people. And it's no accident it's happening, as I mentioned, about solar flares and things like this, to when there's a little more tension in your day or in your life or with you between other people, to see it, but not fall headfirst into it, become identified with it, become negative about it, express negativity about it. This doesn't mean act like everything's okay. No, it means see things as they are and be conscious of them as they are without attaching as a sense of identity in relation to them, as though my identity is now invested in this, in the heat, or in the ache in my back, or in the election, or in the war, or in some controversy that happened at work today, or a disagreement I had with someone. No, to just see those things as they are. This is when these idea of these laws that we're under, and it shows you how difficult it is to escape from these laws. People think, I'm just going to go sit on the mountain and be blissful. It's not, these are big, big, big laws that we are under, that we're talking about. And this thing about being more conscious and more awake and escaping from these laws is a very subtle, it's like a tiny little needle slipping through this huge mass of material, finding a little hole, and just slipping through unnoticed. And that's the thing, consciousness slips through to a higher dimension of awareness as itself. It slips through unnoticed. And so it's an internal transformation that is silent, wordless, motionless. It's a beingness of presence that recognizes it's not collapsing into all the pull of all this imagination, identification, negativity, inner considering. And you feel it, it's a lighter, more radiant, more vibrant realization of being. But at the same time, related to this and related to suffering, consider this. We take for granted the sunlight coming from the sun. We fail to recognize the light of the sun is the result of heat. It's not just light beaming out. It's a manifestation of heat. And this heat is so powerful, so dynamic on the sun. You could almost say the sun's body is comprised of a multitude of nuclear bombs. It's exploding all the time. And it's generating this incredible heat. And this incredible heat is generating this life-sustaining light. And of course, we can even feel the heat. We can feel it as heat too. You don't even see light. This is interesting. You can feel the heat of the sun, but you can't see the light of the sun. You see it reflected in objects. And if you do turn around and try to look at the sun, you don't actually see its light. You do in a way, but it's also interesting. Rodney Collin pointed this out. You can't look at the sun for very long. And he said, it's because as a human being, the human being is not designed to look into the next higher dimension. We cannot look into that dimension. We don't have the tools for it, the capacity. But consciousness, awareness inside does. It doesn't mean it can look at the sun. It means it can perceive into that higher world because it is in that higher world. And so, but suffering in our lives is the result of friction, of like hydrogen atoms on the sun combining into this chemical nuclear explosion. What suffering does for us as human beings is exactly the same thing. It's our version of the sun in a way. It creates this friction. This friction creates heat in us, which we experience as suffering. And then awakening refers to, and transformation of suffering refers to, there's no other word really, but using that to heighten consciousness, rather than that defeating consciousness and us then feeling sorry for ourselves, wishing it wasn't happening, feeling that it's not justified, wishing it would go away, that it's bad, all these things. This is the collapse of consciousness. And if you read some of the great books of literature, and even if you read, for example, Viktor Frankl, who wrote that beautiful book about his time in the concentration camp in Germany, that is a book about transformation, that story of his life, the way he tells it. And it has to do largely with the fact that he looked his suffering right as it was. He looked at it as it was. He didn't reject it. He didn't resist it. He didn't collapse into it. He used it as a catalyst. He managed somehow to find out. He found a way in himself to use it as a catalyst. And it transformed his consciousness. And then once his consciousness was transformed, it transformed his person. It wasn't that he, Viktor Frankl, transformed as a person. Yes, he did, but it's because his consciousness was heightened, and then that heightened consciousness changed the manner of the person that he was. And so I'm just trying to draw this parallel between the sun, this beautiful light, right? The beautiful light that floods the earth, the beautiful light of consciousness doesn't come from nowhere. It's the product of great heat. And even that heat is the product of something else.
And the sun is serving 24/7, serving the benefit of the galaxy.
Or of the solar system.
Of the solar system, the life on Earth. I mean, it's giving. That's interesting. The more a higher level of wisdom, let's call it higher level of wisdom, there is an increased level of serving the whole and the diminished interest of ego self-serving.
Yes, and sometimes teachers ask, why do you keep teaching? Or why are you teaching? And in a way, I've heard different answers to this, but to me, they are all saying in different ways, kind of, well, the sun keeps emitting light. It keeps sustaining the other forms of these forms of life in its arena or in its world.
You know, one last idea I want to touch upon. We mentioned this, and I can see that somebody can challenge it, and I welcome that. But we mentioned this, that the human being, the human as a species, as an experiment, is a creation experiment. The human being, we say that it is the most sophisticated and the most complex life form. And this is known in terms of creatures and animals, that the nervous system and the brain is the most complex and the most sophisticated nervous system. And then we talked about the fact that we have one additional function. We have the intellect, which is the capacity to visualize and to create abstract thoughts, and which is, so this is one thing that we have on top of all the other creatures. We have the intellect. So somehow we say, well, okay, we are superior, or more complex and more developed, perfected machinery. Well, then how come? Oh, and then due to the fact that we have one other function, we have this intellectual center. There's an idea in the fourth way that you need to have these three different functions, like the intellect, the emotional, and the moving instinctive. You need to have these three to work together in order for the possibility of self-consciousness, for the possibility of the presence to realize itself. Somehow it needs it needs the dimension of the intellect, which is interesting because usually the intellect is like poo-pooed. But okay, so from one angle we are saying that, hey, man is a superior, more complex, sophisticated species with another function and capacity of self-consciousness, and the only species that has the ability to evolve. Okay, but on the other hand,
that we are aware of.
yeah,
I mean, and we're not aware of very much of the solar system or
right,
the
on this planet,
Yeah,
this planet. And yet, in spite of that, this human being can be worse than like a very primitive animal and is responsible. So such a sophisticated machinery is responsible for like ruining the ecosystem and messing with the well-being of the planet. And from one angle, can be seen that humanity, or part of humanity, could be seen as a cancer at the level of the earth that goes against itself and keep eating the health. Yeah. So how come? Yeah. And that's what in the fourth way there's this idea that, okay, so because we have one extra function, there is the possibility. There's the possibility, and we also have the choice. We have some kind of choice, some kind of free will that we can choose to remain as we are, be mechanical and asleep, or with the right circumstances to choose to evolve, to transcend this stuff. So, yeah. However, because without evolution, the fact that we have an additional function, basically we are the only species, it seems, here on this earth that is not aligned with nature, with the Tao. You know, the wolves, the snails, the whales, the octopuses, all the migratory birds, they are kind of aligned with the flows of nature. There's one with nature. There's this, they are in harmony with it mechanically, automatically. Yeah. We as a human being, we have an additional function, but we are asleep. So we are the only species here that seems now to forget the harmony, and we are going against the law. We think we are the most important thing, and we are alone in the whole galaxy, and we are special in the whole galaxy. So that's why it gets twisted and rotten.
And the fourth way explains that, in fact, that is all part of the design. That is part of the, in fact, that human beings are in harmony with the whole, even though consciousness is asleep. But this extra capacity you're talking about enables consciousness to move in another direction, to ascend. But in fact, people going to war, people killing each other, people having psychotic episodes, people, whatever, they're actually in harmony with this big design of what organic life on Earth, which includes humanity as only one part of it, is doing its job perfectly, which is these juices in the stomach, this digestive process happening in the solar system. And it, what seems like a cancer, us somehow being cancerous to nature, no, we're actually, it's exactly what is supposed to happen. But we have this other thing. And when you mentioned the intellect, what I recalled in my mind is that the intellect, you could look at the intellectual center as the one center in us that, and sometimes it's compared to a mirror. The idea, like the mind as a mirror, and it is the only center really that, or not the only, in some way, the emotional center has this too in a different way, but the instinctive and moving centers don't so much. And that is, the intellectual center as a mirror can reflect awareness back to itself. It would be as though the sun is shining, it's reflecting off the earth, and that reflection is coming back to the sun. And the sun now realizes it's the sun. Prior to that, it had been beaming itself, its light onto the earth, and it became, as it were, preoccupied, identified with the earth, and even thought itself to be the earth, a feeling of I in earth. And then, but this intellectual center, being as this mirror, it can reflect the light back. And then awareness through that process can realize itself. And it's no accident that knowledge, for example, knowledge about these processes of awakening and enlightenment and so on that existed for millennia, it's knowledge, which is a thing for the intellectual center. It's all part of this mirror. And it's actually awareness reflecting itself and then being reflected back through this mirror, and cognizing itself as the source of the light. I heard something recently, someone asked me, they said they saw, maybe they read it, I don't remember if they saw it on the television. The question was being asked something like, can or does awareness pray to itself? Which is a very interesting idea. And I wrote about this in my book, not my book, but a book that was written through me, called Talks with Merlin. And it's about prayer. And something I wrote in that book, and it's about this idea, is that in fact, when we pray, you could say that it is awareness, is casting its light into the mind, into the intellect, and into the emotional center of the heart. And they are praying, in effect, for awareness to be itself. But the origin of that impulse for the mind and the heart to activate what is called prayer actually is coming from awareness. It is not awareness praying for itself so much, because it doesn't actually, well, in a way I was going to say it doesn't need to, but it casts this impulse into the human mechanism. And the impulse produces something that human beings have learned to generate as prayer. And then that prayer brings the light, as it were, of the sun back to itself. And this is this special thing we have as human beings. Again, as far as we know, the mineral world, the animal world, the vegetable kingdom, none of them that can't happen. That cannot happen in them, whereby they serve as some kind of very sophisticated mirror, such that awareness can cast its light and that will be reflected back to itself. And somehow at our place in the universe, and this goes back to the cosmology, Spensky said we need to study our place in the universe. So this isn't just about us. As we exist here, isolated in singular object form, human, wanting to be happy, or no, it isn't just about us. Somehow this design at this place in the ray of creation, in the universe, exists in such a way that awareness can realize itself. Almost, it seems to me, as though to be able to breathe back into itself. It has been breathed out into all this form. We're at the very bottom almost of the ray of creation. And somehow now it can go back. It has to realize itself. In fact, this is the idea of the alpha and the omega, the absolute and the moon in this whole ray of creation. The absolute exists at the very top and at the bottom. It is the whole thing, but those are the 2 points, you could say, where it can realize itself fully. Or it's hard to put it much more in words, but this idea, see, again, we take it for granted. We think our mind is our mind. We think we can think about things with this brain. It's much more than that when you put it in the perspective of consciousness. And by the way, if you take awareness, consciousness out of the human machine, everything else turns off. The mind ceases to operate. It's only operating by virtue of awareness, of consciousness to begin with.
Yeah, that's interesting that in the second state, waking sleep and self-forgetfulness and sense of separation, there is this sense of lack and meaninglessness, and antsiness and something is not quite right, and yeah, because somehow humanity in that setting is living for itself, and it's not designed to be like that. And this it seems that this awakening, to what we are and to all that is, this is like more like a first step towards to play at another level where we can be serving or being helpful to the totality. And it seems like whenever people do that, if they happen to be doing that in some form or another, there's a sense of fulfillment and purpose and rightness. And it's interesting that nature or God implanted this, there's this device in us when we are going against the law, the truth of what is here. We feel that something is not right. And then we are going back on track. We feel that things are right.
And it's true that there is something wrong. And it is that awareness is not cognizant as itself. And you could almost say that, again, this is almost awareness or the beingness of consciousness, the pure being from which awareness comes, is manifested from, is almost sending a signal to itself in the human being. Something my life doesn't feel right. I'm not satisfied. I'm not.
Yeah.
It's almost, when this happens to you, you can almost use it as a wake-up call, literally, that awareness is trying to send a signal, a message, that it's not fully cognizant as itself. And this is, we even experience the desire to want to find ourselves, the desire to want to be our true self. All these, you can also view these as impulses that are the result of some kind of signal and something coming out from awareness itself to recognize itself. And in this way, we are this temple. We are this, the body and mind of you. We are this servant, this vehicle, all for the purpose of the self-consciousness of awareness. And some say this is the highest game being played. Awareness is playing this game with itself. And we are part of that. We're part of the chessboard. We're part of the pieces on the game. But the game is really being played from a higher dimension. That's just an analogy, and it's more philosophical. But it's also worth just keeping in mind. And it can be very emotional to come to that, to think like that. Yes, this cosmology, it's beautiful, it's powerful, it's humbling, as we said last time, and can be quite inspiring. It can lead us to this bigger picture. That's what we called it, the bigger picture. And awareness can expand, I call it, and realize itself as these higher and higher worlds, these higher and higher dimensions, which have an exact corollary in us compared to the physical universe.
Well, just as a last thought, and maybe we should finish for this talk. But if you are new to this, you haven't seen other stuff we are doing, and you watch till the end, I mean, I would like to give you a gift or something that you stay till the end of this video. But we are not just talking here. This is both. So if somehow this has a bug of interest for you, you are interested, both Peter and myself, we are engaging in very serious psychological work and working with people interested to apply these teachings of the fourth way and stuff like that. So this is meant to open the mind of the seeker, of the practitioner, open the box to something. And in this way, all the psychological work, somatic processing work, mindfulness, meditation, self-remembering, all of this that many people do these days. I mean, it became part of the Instagram and part of New Agey, and everybody is doing something. I mean, not everybody, but many people are genuinely interested in some kind of inner growth, inner something. But very often it stays at this level of the ego, basically. Ego trying to have it a little bit better, ego to be a little more expanded. And as one of my teachers used to say, you know, a pig, if you take a pig and you blow it and you even put makeup and it's beautiful and it's still a pig, you know, it's not going to become like a goddess. So that is in the fourth way point of view, there is this work of bringing awareness and knowing oneself and letting go of weaknesses and mechanical tendencies, but all to diminish the veils and the ignorance so we can see who we are and all that is, and we can be more aligned to the architect. We are more really aligned with trying to understand more what our real father, mother, our creator, you know, be helpful to our creator if possible.
There's a line, a thought I had many years ago, which I still use for myself, and in this sense I think it applies, and that is, on a clear day or on a clear night, step outside and look up at the vast universe and do this. Notice yourself noticing the universe, noticing you, noticing it. Notice yourself noticing the universe, noticing you notice it. And this idea, which our consciousness is wanting to, you could say, that isn't even the right word, is inclined to aligning itself, the awareness in us aligning itself with its source. And somehow it knows the way home to this source. And it's through more and more presence, more and more awareness, consciousness, both of things and of itself as itself. Both of these can become more vibrant, more clear, more mysterious, more wondrous, and more telling. Notice yourself noticing the universe, noticing you noticing it. This requires more than thought.
Yeah. This reminds me a little bit of some years ago when I was visiting more with Francis Lucille, and I was dealing with some suffering, which was due to being in a box, you know, and I asked him a bunch of times, Francis, what do you recommend? What shall I do? And he told me, you know, various things to observe because I was dealing with some kind of suffering in the evening or in the night. There's some kind of sense of separation, sense of emotional lack, sense of something. And he told me, he at some point he was like, dude, you got to allow this, witness it, be present to it. I mean, it's not so unbearable, right? And so somehow I was not content with his answer. And I asked him, hey, what would you do if you had this thing? How would you work with it? And he paused for an extensive period and he said, well, I would go outside and I would remind myself of the beauty of the infinite. if we are caught in a little ego thing, we can't see the beauty of the universe. That's the thing. We are missing out. So let's pause here, Peter.
Thank you, Mihai.
Thank you. May it inspire you or benefit people on the path. Ciao.